To murder somebody by poisoning is exceptionally rare.
This takes a great deal of intelligence. This is not a brute force weapon.
He was a very evil, very devious person.
Susan could have very well been his next murder victim.
They want to sit from afar and watch someone suffer.
I hope I'm not a prime suspect.
He's not the kind of person to get mad. He's the kind that would get even.
The Dubberly family lived happily in Alturas, Florida, before 1998. They were regular churchgoers and led a trouble-free life. However, their peace was shattered when, on June 14, 16-year-old Dwayne Dubberly discovered a threatening letter in their mailbox. The letter warned the family to leave Florida or face fatal consequences. Upon showing the letter to his parents, Peggy, Dwayne's mother, became increasingly concerned, whereas Pi, her husband, dismissed it as a mere prank. 4 months later, on October 23rd, Peggy fell severely ill, experiencing nausea, excruciating pain, and significant hair loss. Despite her worsening condition, Pi refused to take her to the hospital. A week later, Peggy lapsed into a coma, and soon after, Dwayne began displaying similar symptoms. The situation reached a critical point December 2nd. The police identified thallium, a lethal chemical found in rat poison, as the cause of their sickness. Tests revealed high levels of thallium in all family members, including Pi. The mystery surrounding the poisoning that threatened Dwayne and his family remained unresolved. Only the intervention of an undercover agent might prevent further tragedy by apprehending the elusive killer. Peggy diligently serves as a waitress at the nearby diner. Having single-handedly raised 3 children for years, she eventually ties the knot with Carr, who also has 2 children of his own.
They seemed to be happy. My mom loved him more than anything.
We seen all the heartbreak that she had gotten in her life. I was hoping that Pi was going to be the one.
The nuclear family settles down in the serene town of Alturas, Florida, as an ideal place to raise their household, where incidents are rare and doors remain unlocked. October 23rd. In the early morning, Peggy sets out for work. Shortly after her arrival at the diner, she starts feeling unwell, experiencing a burning sensation in her legs and feet, along with severe chest pain. Peggy's condition deteriorates rapidly, prompting her transportation to the hospital where she's nearly incapacitated. Doctors conduct multiple tests, including blood samples. Each result turns out negative, leaving her physician unable to provide a diagnosis. Eventually, Peggy is discharged with nothing more than a prescription to alleviate her pain.
She was laying in bed and she couldn't move. She said she couldn't open her eyes. She was nauseated. She was sick. She was very sick.
October 30th. Precisely a week after the onset of her initial symptoms, Peggy, along with her son Dwayne and stepson Travis, is urgently transported to Winter Haven Hospital. Each of them displays identical symptoms, prompting immediate medical attention.
Throwing up, super dehydrated. The pain that I had was unbearable. It was like 1,000 needles just wrapped around your foot. I was just crying. Me and Travis were both just crying. I honestly thought I was gonna die.
As Peggy is admitted to the intensive care unit, infectious disease specialist Robert Van Hook observes something concerning.
At one point, she was noticed to have her hair coming out. It was not just a few hairs, she was losing excessive amounts of hair.
Dr. Van Hook becomes increasingly concerned about the situation, suspecting it might be due to poisoning. This particular type of poison wouldn't typically manifest in routine lab tests. However, he's familiar with it from medical literature. Determined to explore further, he opts to conduct an additional test specifically for thallium poisoning. Thallium, once widely used in rat poison until its ban in the United States in 1972, poses severe risks upon ingestion, leading to symptoms like delirium, paralysis, and even fatality. Tragically, there is no known antidote for thallium poisoning. Upon receiving the test results, it's revealed that Peggy's system contains an alarming 50 times the maximum survivable amount of thallium. Subsequently, on October 31, Peggy slips into a coma. Travis, her stepson, relies on a respirator for support, and Dwayne, her son, shows no signs of improvement.
Our sole purpose was to identify that poison and have it removed from the environment to prevent further injury to any of the persons.
Despite enduring immense pain, Dwayne insists on being transported up 4 floors to visit his mom. However, nothing could brace him for the distressing sight awaiting him. Immediately, law enforcement initiates an all-out effort to trace the origin of the poisoning. Detective Ernie Mincy from the Polk County Sheriff's Office takes charge of the investigation. They conduct thorough investigations into the nearby orange groves, the local water supply, and even Peggy's workplace, the restaurant. However, despite their efforts, no traces of thallium are discovered. Soon after, the details of the situation become public knowledge, triggering widespread panic and concern among the people.
The community was clamoring for answers so that they would know whether or not they were safe.
I mean, we truly didn't know in the very beginning how this all came about. How did these people ingest? How did they touch? How did they inhale?
Some of your first thoughts are the worst thoughts. How many more people will show up at the hospital with this heavy metal poisoning?
Investigators meticulously search the Carr residence, meticulously collecting dust samples and amassing over 400 household items for comprehensive laboratory scrutiny. Among these, one crucial discovery is made, a 6-pack of Coke bottles, 3 of which remain unopened. Shockingly, subsequent tests reveal that each of the unopened bottles contains over 1 gram of thallium, sufficient to cause fatality in an adult. Detective Mincy comprehends that there are only 2 conceivable scenarios. The first involves potential tampering with the product at the Coke factory. If this holds true, it raises alarming concerns about how many more individuals might have unwittingly consumed the poisoned beverage.
Where else could this be throughout not only the county, but the state or the nation?
They had people down here who were scared to death to drink Coke. The initial step was to look at the bottling company and see what could have happened there.
However, in collaboration with Coca-Cola, the possibility of widespread tampering is swiftly dismissed.
It was actually physically impossible to tamper with the product at the plant.
This leaves Detective Mincy with just one plausible scenario, a deliberate and targeted attack on Peggy Carr and her family. As the investigation intensifies to identify a suspect, their initial focus narrows down to scrutinizing the family members.
Her husband was a suspect when Peggy was very sick, and Pye didn't appear to be. Obviously, you think of him.
We dug very deeply at that point into Pye Carr's background, anything that would show motivation to poison his wife.
Despite Peggy and Carr's recent marriage, lasting merely 7 months, it appears their honeymoon phase was fleeting. Pye had been dedicating extended hours at the mine, triggering suspicions in Peggy. On one occasion, she caught him with another woman. Detective Mincy uncovers further details indicating that during the weekend Peggy fell ill initially. Pye conveniently happened to be out of town. Upon his return, he vehemently resisted taking his wife to the hospital. All evidence seems to converge toward Pye Carr, leading even Dwayne to consider the possibility of his guilt. However, something about this doesn't align with Detective Mincy's understanding. The question arises, why would Pye Carr poison his own son, Travis? During their interrogation of Pye, an unexpected revelation further perplexes the police. On June 14, 4 months preceding Peggy's poisoning, Dwayne discovers a letter in the mailbox. Inside, there's a yellow post-it note containing a typewritten threatening message. It said, "You and all your so-called family." The letter, although addressed to Pye Carr, contains a misspelling of his name. Could it be possible that Pye Carr sent the threatening letter to himself? However, Detective Mincy then becomes aware of another incident that occurred a few years earlier.
2 of the Carr dogs died suddenly within a couple weeks of each other.
Both dogs had become very ill. Their fur had fallen out.
We suspect they experimented on the dog first.
Peggy's condition worsens steadily while Dwayne and Travis show no signs of recovery. Consequently, the remaining family members undergo thallium testing. Shockingly, the test results surpass everyone's expectations. Everyone within the household exhibited traces of thallium in their system, the report reveals, including Pye Carr. This revelation means Carr is no longer considered a suspect in the case.
Anybody that had enough knowledge to do this crime wouldn't ingest thallium and take that risk. They just wouldn't do it.
2-year-old Casey, Peggy's granddaughter, similarly exhibits traces of thallium poisoning. March 3, 1989. Peggy has been enduring this suffering for 5 long months. It's at this critical juncture that Dwayne is summoned to her bedside for what seems to be the final time. With Peggy's condition becoming increasingly dire, the family faces the agonizing decision of removing her from life support. Peggy Carr passes away at Bartow Memorial Hospital, a devastating loss as she was merely 41 years old. The nuclear family is left utterly shattered by this tragedy. While Dwayne slowly recuperates from the poisoning, he and his siblings are relocated to live with relatives. Simultaneously, Pi and his children also vacate the premises. Consequently, the house in Altura stands abandoned. For Detective Mincy, Peggy's tragic demise marks a significant turning point. The case now transforms into a full-fledged murder investigation.
To murder somebody by poisoning is exceptionally rare. It is something that has to be thought up in a very demented mind by a very brilliant person who thinks that they're smarter than everyone else.
Upon examination by the FBI, the contaminated Coke bottles reveal minuscule scratch marks, indicating a meticulous process, deliberate opening, addition of thallium, and resealing of the caps to conceal any tampering. Thallium, being tasteless, odorless, and easily soluble, usually causes soda to fizz excessively, alter its color, and leave sediment at the base. However, the thallium-laced mixture found in the soda evaded these typical manifestations. The perpetrator behind the lacing of the Coke bottles with thallium possesses a sophisticated understanding of chemistry. This implies the work of an exceptionally intelligent individual, making them extremely challenging to apprehend. Consequently, law enforcement commences questioning neighbors residing near the Carr house and throughout the town in an effort to gather more information. The nearest household in proximity happens to belong to George Trepal and his wife, Diana. During Detective Mincy's interrogation with Trepal, his response to inquiries regarding the Carrs is notably and surprisingly hostile.
He went into a tirade about the problems with these red-necked children and family that live next to him.
Why someone might desire to poison the Carr family remains a perplexing question. The identical message inscribed within the threatening letter. Authorities discover that George Trepal is a self-taught chemist, while his wife, Diana, holds a master's degree in chemistry. Both individuals are highly intelligent, being members of Mensa, an exclusive society for individuals with EECs in the top 2% of the population. However, upon delving deeper into Trepal's history, investigators uncover that he has a previous criminal record and has served time in prison. One of the components frequently utilized in the manufacture of amphetamine is thallium. Consequently, George Trepal emerges as a person of interest in the investigation, a revelation that even catches Peggy's son, Dwayne, by surprise. Detective Mincy also uncovers that Trepal had a disagreement with the Carrs regarding loud music, adding to the details under scrutiny in the investigation. Shortly, within less than 48 hours post the argument, Peggy fell victim to poisoning. Investigators strongly suspect they've identified the right individual. However, lacking concrete evidence, they refrain from making an arrest. Typically, one potential course of action involves bringing the suspect in for interrogation with the hope of obtaining a confession. However, detectives are doubtful that this approach would be effective with Trepal. The FBI proposes a singular solution, employing an undercover agent to outmaneuver the highly intelligent individual at his own strategies. Detective Ernest Mincy appoints Special Agent Susan Goreck to lead this mission. Her task involves infiltrating the Mensa group, of which George Trepal is a member.
We suspected it would only be for that weekend that I would have to do the undercover role.
And I was told to be careful because the person had a photographic memory, so if he saw us, that he could remember our cars or our faces.
Under an assumed identity, Susan prepares to attend a Mensa murder mystery weekend, an event hosted by George and Diana. Susan Goreck adopts the persona of Sherry Ginn, a woman navigating a pending divorce from an abusive spouse. On April 14th, 1989, Susan, in character as Sherry Ginn, proceeds to the local hotel where the gathering is taking place. Upon arrival, she is welcomed by none other than George Trepal himself. Detective Goreck, now assuming the guise of Sherry Ginn, finds herself directly facing a suspected murderer. Trepal's reaction doesn't indicate recognition of Susan, but she cannot be entirely certain. Considering he is not a confrontational individual likely to openly acknowledge it, Susan decides to maintain her charade and play along with the situation. The pamphlet was crafted by George himself and contains meticulously outlined murder scenarios that participants are to solve throughout the weekend. One of these scenarios specifically revolves around a poisoning incident. The message bears a haunting resemblance to the one received by the Carr family before Peggy's poisoning. Instantly, Susan is convinced that she has identified the correct suspect. While attempting to converse with Trepal, Susan remains vigilant with every word she utters. She understands that a single mistake could potentially endanger her life. Before the conclusion of the weekend, Sherry shares with George her plans of relocating to Florida as a means to escape her husband. This moment marks Detective Goreck's initial breakthrough in the investigation. The undercover operation, initially intended for just a weekend, is prolonged. Susan persists in risking her safety, sustaining her portrayal as Sherry. Despite the dangers, she perceives this as a potential opening to gather evidence that could aid her team in obtaining a search warrant for the house. During the house tour, Trepal mentions to Sherry that Alturas is notably safe, highlighting that no one bothers to lock their door. Susan's observations around the premises raise suspicions, however. Despite these concerns, the gathered information falls short of meeting the criteria necessary to acquire a search warrant. The intended strategy has encountered a setback. Once outside the house, Susan must persist in upholding her Sherry Ginn identity to continue accumulating evidence against George Trepal. All the while, she's keenly aware of the fact that he is an exceedingly intelligent perpetrator. Throughout the ensuing months, Susan rendezvous with Trepal during a sequence of lunch dates. Meanwhile, a surveillance team meticulously observes from a distance, documenting and monitoring his every action. The situation has hit a dead end. Following her departure from Trepal's residence, Susan persists in upholding her Sherry Ginn guise to gather substantial evidence against George Trepal, an astute and dangerous individual. She navigates this precarious situation with caution, aware that her life and her family's lives could be at stake if her cover is blown. Over several months, Susan meets Trepal for numerous lunches while being meticulously surveilled by a distant team capturing every move. Susan exercises extreme caution during these meetings, refraining from consuming any food or drink upon returning to the table. It takes a considerable amount of time for Trepal to confide enough in her, revealing his disdain for individuals he perceives as less intelligent. After 8 months, Susan accumulates a wealth of small evidence, but falls short of enough material to build a solid case against Trepal. Her superiors start questioning the operation's effectiveness, potentially considering its termination. However, for Susan, this mission holds more profound implications as she contemplates the safety of her own family. Finally, in December 1989, Detective Goreck receives the awaited call. George and Diana have vacated the area, allowing Sherry Ginn to move into their residence. Given Trepal's perceived intellect, they search for traces of residue rather than directly looking for thallium around the house. George Trepal and his wife departed, leaving behind their furnished house, providing an opportunity for the unit to gather samples. Time is of the essence. January 1990. Despite the absence of updates from the lab, Susan recognizes she can't afford to wait any longer for the results. She resolves to take matters into her own hand, devises a plan to manipulate Trepal into self-incrimination. Unbeknownst to Susan, Trepal is also orchestrating a scheme to ensnare her. I arranged a meeting with George at a small picnic spot located behind a Sebring McDonald's, Susan recalls. Susan tactfully presents Trepal with a business card, claiming it was inadvertently left behind by detectives who were searching for him. Instantly, Trepal's demeanor shifts, indicating a noticeable change in his behavior. The substance discovered in Trepal's garage was thallium nitrate, precisely the compound utilized in the murder of Peggy Carr and the attempted murder of her entire family. On April 5, George Trepal is apprehended at his recently established residence in Sebring. He displays no visible reaction, maintaining composure even when his acquaintance Sherry Ginn reveals her true identity to him. I stated, "George, my name is Special Agent Susan Goreck. I'm affiliated with the Polk County Sheriff's Office, and I'm here to serve this warrant on you and to obtain handwriting samples." He responded with a nonchalance and simply smiled at me. However, Susan remains unaware of just how perilously close she was to becoming Trepal's next murder victim. Meanwhile, during the search of Trepal's Sebring residence, the authorities make a startling revelation. While inspecting for a concealed room akin to the one in George Trepal's previous house, they stumble upon a door concealed behind a pegboard. The single window within the soundproof area has been tightly sealed off. Upon entering the room, they find a platform bed equipped with wooden stirrups. The trial spans 2 months, yet the jury swiftly deliberates for merely 4 hours before reaching a verdict. On March 6, 1991, nearly 2 years following Peggy's tragic demise, George Trepal is convicted on all charges. The court's ruling condemns him to death. Susan Goreck ensured justice prevailed for Peggy's family, risking everything to incarcerate this criminal mastermind. The remaining family members who were poisoned all made successful recoveries. However, for Dwayne, enduring the loss of his mother at the tender age of 16 has been exceptionally challenging. In the aftermath of her passing, Dwayne coped with his sorrow through episodes of anger and emotional outbursts. However, following a period of getting into trouble, he made a decision to write to his mother. In his letter, Dwayne expressed, "Dearly missed mother. I've made mistakes and faced challenges. I'm trying to navigate this world without your guidance, and it's been tough. But I promise to make you proud. I'll strive to be the person you always believed I could become. Your love and lessons resonate within me every day. Love, always, Dwayne." Dwayne upheld his commitment. Presently, he is happily married and has embraced the role of a nurturing father figure for his own family.